When you walk into a room, you see that room in a three-dimensional space. However, put a camera right there, exactly where you're standing. It could be the most expensive cinema camera in the world. You put it on a tripod, set it exactly the way you're looking, and you look at your camera monitor, well, now that is a two-dimensional image. It's no longer 3D. Now, when you go watch your favorite movies or TV shows, obviously it doesn't look two-dimensional. The image pops and it looks more three-dimensional and more realistic. It looks more like something that you and I would see if we were to walk into that same room. Now, cinematographers will utilize different tools and techniques to make that image look more three-dimensional through camera movement, camera composition, and then tools such as the camera sensor size, and camera lenses. And then what we're going to talk about in this video, lighting. And specifically what I want to talk about in this video is the LED panel versus the point source light. Well, what's going on? Thanks so much for checking out this video. My name is Tyler Edwards. I am a filmmaker based out of Colorado. And as I just mentioned, I'm going to talk about two different light fixtures, the LED panel and the point source light. Now, there are a myriad of different types of light sources and light fixtures to talk about. However, the point source light and the LED panel are typically the first go-to lights that you'll find on set. They're really common to use on set, but if you're a filmmaker, a production company, or YouTube content creator, whatever the case may be, and you're building up your kit, these are typically the first two types of lights that you'll go for because of their versatility. Now, to keep this video as brief as possible, I'm just going to kind of breeze over some of the topics and talk about some instances where you might want to use the LED panel, some instances where you might want to get the point source light, and what kind of light may be the first best light for you to pick up. So real quick, let's just talk about some of the differences between an LED panel and a point source light. Now, when I'm talking about LED panels, I'm talking like the 1x1, 1x2 range, like a Sky Panel or Nova or Gemini or something like that, because they're typically a more comparable in output to a point source light as opposed to one of those little mini LED panels that you can get. So an LED panel is a panel of lights, and it has a panel of LEDs. There's a bunch of LEDs that are arranged on this panel, and each of those LEDs emit their own light. And you can have bicolor ones where some of them are daylight balanced and some of them are tungsten, or you can have RGBW, RGBWW, depending on the LED light. So RGBWW meaning you have a red, a green, a blue, and then a warm white and a cool white chip to kind of give you more flexibility on color temperature options. But they all kind of are the same kind of basic concept. It's a bunch of LEDs on a panel, and each of those LEDs emit their own light. And the most notable characteristic of an LED panel is they typically start off as a soft light source. However, on the contrary, a single source, a point source light, is a single source of light which casts a much harder light, so it gives much harder shadows as opposed to the soft light coming from an LED panel. So why would you choose an LED panel over a point source light or vice versa? Well, let's go ahead and jump into it, and first we'll talk about the LED panel. Now, there are a variety of types of LED panels that you can get. You can get bicolor ones, you can get ones that are RGB, you can get ones that are kind of the matte type, like the ones that literally roll out, or you can get ones like a Sky Panel or a Nova P300C or something like that that's kind of a bigger unit and self-contained unit that needs to be on a heavier duty light stand. But regardless, if your LED fixture is something like the Aputure Nova or Sky Panel, or something like a light matte or flexible LED panel, they still share very similar characteristics. And one of those characteristics is they start off as a relatively soft light source. Now, soft light is very popular, especially for lighting people and skin tones, because it hides blemishes and it overall looks a little bit more flattering on skin tones. So for interviews and narrative work, whatever the case may be, skin tones are typically more flattering with soft light. And soft light meaning your transition from your highlights to your shadows is the roll off is much smoother as opposed to a hard light source where you have a very harsh shadow. However, even though LED panels start off as a soft light source, you still need to add diffusion in front of it or bounce that light or something for a couple of reasons. Number one, the LED panel, like I said, there's a panel, there's individual LED lights, individual diodes that are emitting light, and each of those little diodes, each of those little lights cast their own shadows, and they can throw off some really weird looking shadows. So you need to add diffusion in front of it to kind of cut that out and kind of blend those lights together even more. Now, some LED panels have a little diffusion panel in front of it to help mitigate that. However, that leads me to my second point, is even though the LED panel is a soft light source and maybe there is a diffusion panel in front of it, that light source is relatively small compared to a subject. So when we take a look at an LED panel, such as like a Aries Sky Panel, which is a 1x1, or Gemini 1x1, or even the Aputure Nova, which is like a 1x1.5, that light source is actually pretty relatively small. So to make that light source even bigger, you want to add a bigger frame of diffusion in front of it, or a bigger bounce card or something to make that light source even bigger. Because the bigger the light source they're going to have, the softer the light you're going to have, and soft light is typically more flattering on skin tones. So to make that light source a little bit softer and a little bit bigger, you might put, a 4x or 6x frame in front of it with some full grid cloth or something, or maybe even bounce it off some foam core or something like that, just to help that light source get even bigger. Now when you start bouncing light or adding more diffusion and everything, you can start having more light spilling onto the background, so you have to start introducing cutters and floppies and stuff to start shaping that light a little bit more, so the setup time can be a little bit longer, and you may require more stands and all that kind of stuff to kind of get the LED panel work the way you want. Now that may seem like a downside because that does add more budget and more time to your production, because you have to get, have more setup time, and you have to get more stands and all that kind of, to be able to kind of shape and diffuse and soften and create the type of light that you want from that LED panel, but the results that you can get can be very, very pleasing. Now on the flip side, these LED panels do have a lot of advantages as well. Like I said, one of them is those flexible LED panels. They're really thin, and you can tape them to the ceiling of cars for interior shots, or just tape them to a wall, just out of frame or something. So you have a lot of versatility there that you may not be able to get with, say, a point source light. Now another benefit of these LED panels is the fact that most of these modern panels are at least bicolor these days, meaning you don't have to gel your lights to get from tungsten to daylight. You can just turn a knob and you can go from, depending on the light, maybe from 2000 to 10,000 Kelvin or somewhere in between. And then some of these other panels are also RGB-WW or RGBW, which allows you to start adding colors into your scene. So if you want to get blues or pinks or greens or whatever in your scene, you're able to do that without having to start shuffling around and finding gels and cutting gels and everything. So that can speed up time on set there. Now with that being said, the LED panel is a very versatile light, but let's kind of shift gears and talk about the point source light now. So as I mentioned earlier, the key difference between a point source light and an LED panel is the fact that a point source light starts off as a hard light source. Now this can be very advantageous because with a hard light source, you can do many things. You can soften that light through softboxes and diffusion to create soft light, or you can keep it as a hard light source and start shaping and cutting the light in different ways to get different effects. For example, if you want to be able to cut light to get a streak of light on the back wall to add a little bit more character during an interview, or maybe even get the Venetian blinds effect, or maybe even you want to get those light rays, you can't do that with a soft light source. You have to do those starting out with a hard light source. So when it comes to single source or point source light fixtures, you got a lot of options out there on the market, frankly, because they've just been around a lot longer than the LED panels have. So you can kind of go the old school, like the ETC Source 4 tungsten fixtures, or you can get the really high output HMI fixtures, or the newer kid on the block, which is kind of what I've invested in, are the LED chip on board lights, such as the 300D Mark II or the 120D series or stuff like that. Now these chip on board or COB lights are becoming much more popular on sets, and a lot of people are starting to favor those on productions more and more for a few reasons. Number one, they just don't get as hot, especially if you're in warmer climates or something and you're doing an indoors interview. Those tungsten lights or HMI lights just can get really stinking hot on the talent, and it can be really uncomfortable on the talent and obviously on crew and everything like that. And number two, they just don't pull as much power they don't draw as much power from the grid. So when you're plugging into a standard household circuit, if you're in interviews in a house or whatever the case may be, and you're on a standard 15 or 20 amp breaker, you can plug way more of these LED lights in because they're drawing much less power, as opposed to plugging in like an HMI or tungsten fixture. So you don't have to worry as much about blowing out a circuit or anything like that. Now, as I mentioned before, with hard light sources, you can create different effects like Venetian blinds if you're using a Leco mount or a spotlight mount, or you can even add barn doors or Fresnel lens or something to kind of focus that light beam even more. However, with hard light, you're not just limited to utilizing a hard light source just for hard light. You can add diffusion or anything like that in front of it to soften the light source. So you can do this by bouncing light, like we talked about with an LED panel. You can bounce the hard light source off of a bounce card or a foam core or something like that to soften that light source, or you can run it through some sort of diffusion paper or grid cloth or anything like that to diffuse the light that way. So you can kind of turn that hard light source into a soft light source. And some of these lights, like the aputure 300D and those types lights that have a Bowens S mount, you can actually add on softboxes right onto the light, so you can get a really quick setup to get really soft light for interviews and stuff like that. In fact, what I'm using right now is I'm using the aputure 300D as my key light, and I've got it in the Light Dome Mark II with a grid on it to help control the spill and all that kind of stuff, but it's giving me a nice soft light source, and that's starting from a very hard light source. Now when it comes to single point source lights, with the exception of some of the newer chip on board lights out there, you're limited to the color temperature of the light, and to change that you have to add gels. So if you have a a tungsten source and you want to cool that down, you got to start adding CTB gels to cool that down. And what happens there is that starts cutting down the light output of the light. So that's something you have to consider, and that's something that you just have to keep in mind when you're using those light sources. Some of those lights, like the Aputure 300D Mark II, is daylight balance, so if you want to cool that down, you have to add CTB, or if you want to warm it up, you have to add CTO. And you just have to be careful too, because you need to make sure that you have heat shield gel in front of it so you don't melt your actual gels, because yeah, I've seen that happen and it's super not fun. So that's going to wrap it up for point source lights. I think point source lights are extremely versatile lights, even if you're starting with a tungsten light or going up to the chip on board lights, and especially the new ones like the Aputure 300X that allows you to change the color temperature. They're becoming more and more versatile on set. Starting out with a hard light source gives you the ability to use it as a hard light source, or to use it as a soft light source by either putting a softbox right up on the fixture if it has a Bowens S mount like the Aputure lights, or bouncing it off a bounce card or through diffusion or whatever to create a soft light for a key light. So between the two, between an LED panel and a point source light, what would I recommend for a first light? I would definitely recommend going for the point source light because of its versatility. But in many cases, I use both lights on set in conjunction together to create whatever look I want. For example, in the case right now, I'm using the Aputure 300D Mark II and the light dome as my key light, and I'm actually using the Aputure Nova P300C as an exposure lift in the background. So if I were to turn the P300C off right now, in the background you can see it just looks a lot more serious and looks like there's going to be a much more serious message going on, and I didn't really want that. I didn't want to have that look, so I added that on the ground. It's just laying on the ground, pointing up into the ceiling, just to add a little bit of exposure to the background, just to kind of make it feel a little bit more airy and more welcome and all that kind of stuff. Well, I have rambled on far too long on this video, and I seem to always do this on videos. I just need to like make a script and go with it, but whatever. Anyways, if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. Maybe hit that subscribe button down below, hit the notification bell next to it so you'll be notified when I make videos like this and ramble on for a really long time in the future. And then below that, there's a thumbs up button if you want to hit that thumbs up button. If you're still here, I give you my blessing to hit that thumbs down button. If you didn't like this video, I mean, if you like this video, like just hit the thumbs up button so like it doesn't look like I have a terrible video. But if you didn't like it, thumbs down, I give you my blessing. Let me know down in the comments why you liked this video or why you didn't like this video. So if you didn't like this video, maybe you can tell me how I can improve in my next videos. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.